Week 12 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I looked at off the wire this week. The first kicker, Cairo Santos of the Chicago Bears. It's been a solid season for Cairo Santos. I know last week it was a down. I know week 10 was a down game for Santos in that one versus the New York Giants. But 3 out of 4 weeks, double-digit fantasy points. He's on one of the more high-powered offenses in the league. And out there in 79% of fantasy leagues. Week 8 at Baltimore, 11. Week 9 at Cincinnati, 10. Week 10 versus the Giants, 5. And Week 11 at Minnesota, 16 fantasy points. So Santos, he had a game winner in that ball game at the Minnesota Vikings. I know he missed a 46-yarder early in that one, but he redeemed himself with a game winner, and he hit in that ball game 3 out of 4 field goals and an extra point. So with all those factors and a good matchup coming up here in Week 12 versus the Steelers, I give up the third most fantasy points to kickers on the season, and they are bend but don't break type of defense. Santos in there this week. The next kicker, Jake Elliott of the Philadelphia Eagles. Elliott coming off his second best game of the season in Week 11 in a cold, windy night over there in Philadelphia with the victory over Detroit 16-9, and he had 10 fantasy points in that game. So he's on a high-powered offense, but we know Philadelphia, more times than not, in that red zone, they go for it a lot with that tush-push on 4th and short. So the last few games for Elliott, Week 8 versus the Giants, 9. Week 10 at the Packers, 4. And Week 11 versus Detroit, 10 fantasy points. So Week 12, great matchup coming up at the Cowboys, a defense that can't stop anyone. Give up the 10th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And also, obviously, as well, an indoor game at Dallas at the Cowboys Stadium. So with all those factors, and Elliott coming off a good game in bad weather conditions, he's a kicker to add this week, and he's available in 69% of fantasy leagues. Next kicker, Andy Rogales of the New England Patriots. Rogales out there in 90% of fantasy leagues, and he's on a high-powered offense with this Patriot team. And he's been an accurate kicker this season is Rogales. Week 8 versus Cleveland, 13. Week 9 versus the Falcons, 6. Week 10 at Tampa Bay, 4. And Week 11 versus the Jets, 9 fantasy points. So this week, good matchup here in Week 12 at the Bengals. Give up the 15th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And Rogales is showing he has range kicking the football. Like I said, many opportunities in a high-powered offense like this New England Patriot team. And he's going out there, and he's made the most of his opportunities in his rookie season. And a kicker to add this week, next kicker, Zane Gonzalez of the Atlanta Falcons. Zane Gonzalez, the third kicker the Falcons are going through this season. Started the year off with Young Hoku, long-time kicker for them, but he struggled mightily, and he's even struggling now with the New York Giants. Then they went to John Parker Romo for about 2 months, and now since Week 10, Zane Gonzalez has taken over, saying 2 games with this Falcon team. Week 10 at Indianapolis, 6, and Week 11 versus the Panthers, 12 fantasy points. So Week 12, a good matchup at the New Orleans Saints. I give up the 16th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. Another indoor game, obviously, which is always a plus this time of year for a kicker to kick indoors. And Zane Gonzalez, like I said, he's been a veteran in this league, but he's bounced around the league of late here. And the last couple weeks since he's got an opportunity, he's made the most of it. So this week with a good matchup coming up in an indoor game in New Orleans, he's out there in 98% of fantasy leagues. And the final kicker, Joey Sly of the Tennessee Titans. And Joey Sly, he's had 6 games with double-digit fantasy points in 10 this season. So Tennessee, we know, can't score the football in the end zone. We know they don't move the football well, and we know Joey Sly, he's had a big boot going all the way back to his early years of his career with the Carolina Panthers. So Joey Sly, 50-plus yards isn't a problem for him. In Week 11, we saw he hit a 56-yarder, and the last few games for Sly, Week 7 versus New England, 10. Week 8 in Indianapolis, 2. Week 9 versus the Chargers, 9. And Week 11 versus the Texans, 10 fantasy points. So Week 12, a matchup versus the Seattle Seahawks, a defense that bends but don't break, where they play good football versus the Rams, holding them down to only 21 points in that ball game. So I think Joey Sly in this offense, obviously, is going to have trouble like they've had all season long moving the football down the field. Calvin Ridley out for the season with the leg injury. So with all those factors, I think Sly will have a few opportunities in this ball game versus the Seattle Seahawks. He's a kicker to add this week's available in 99% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few kickers I looked at off the wire for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.